This video, we're going to talk about a new Tesla gigafactory, what it could entail, and we're going to start by reminding you about how phenomenal Tesla's valuation is today, its potential share price in the future, and what we need to be able to see the share price actually grow that way in the future. Let's get started. First, the very last video that I did on Tesla, I talked about how we want to see about 4.2 million vehicles produced at Tesla in 2025. That would be all gigafactories at full capacity: Shanghai, Fremont, Berlin, and Austin. The problem is, if you're at full capacity at all factories, there's something very, very dangerous that could happen to the valuation of Tesla. Its growth could stop. When a company stops growing, its PEG ratio, its future valuation, plummets. Don't worry so much about what that means in the future, but think about this. What would you pay more money for, right? This is a very simple example. What would you pay more money for? Would you pay more money for Procter & Gamble, which let's say has $1 of earnings per share? Or would you rather pay more money for Tesla at $1 per share? Well, you can't really answer that because you don't have how much they're growing at, right? Okay, well, let's say that Procter & Gamble is growing revenues at 4% per year. Not revenues, this would be earnings per share. In that case, earnings per share next year would be $1.04, right? So you have to give some valuation to this growth that Procter & Gamble has. Now, what if I told you that Tesla was actually growing at 0% because they filled up their factories and they're just every single year doing 4.2 million vehicles? That's it, no growth. Well, if the earnings per share aren't going to grow, then the valuation that you can give to Tesla would actually be lower than the valuation that you can give to Procter & Gamble. So now let's say Procter & Gamble is selling for 10 times earnings per share. Well, then this would be a $10 stock, and their growth is 4%. If you divide these two, you'd get something called a PEG ratio of 2.5. So it's selling for a PEG ratio of 2.5. Keep this number in mind. And I'm just making up these numbers to make a simple point because it's really important to understand this so you can understand why this Tesla announcement coming up is so critical. Okay, well, if Tesla's growing at 0%, then its multiple would be infinite, right? Its PEG ratio multiple would be infinite. But we know Tesla's not growing at 0%. Let's say that Tesla is growing at 10% per year. So their EPS is growing at 10%, and this company is now selling for 10 times earnings. Well, in this case, the company would be selling for $10, and its PEG ratio would actually be 1. And if this is all the information that you had for the two companies, which company would you prefer to invest in? A company where you have to pay $1 for every 1% of growth, hence 1 PE, or would you rather pay $2.50 or $2.50 for every 1% of growth of the company? Well, obviously, this one here is cheaper. And the reason I make this example is because a lot of folks in my last video, when we talk about the future valuation of Tesla, they don't seem to understand how important growth rates are for companies. And what I'd like to do is just give you an example of the following stocks so you could see what you generally see from a price to earnings growth multiple. So what you're going to do is you're going to look right here at this column that I am bolding right now. And at the top, you can see Tesla selling for about 0.59, whereas Apple is selling for 2.7 times. You've got Autodesk selling for nearly 2 times, Trade Desk at nearly 1.76 times, Nvidia 1, Embraer is only 0.41, Cloudflare is selling for 6 times, Etsy selling for 2.36 times. Obviously, the lower, the better. And when we look at lower, the better, we get companies like SolarEdge, AMD, Nvidia, Embraer, and Tesla that are selling really, really low for the amount of growth these companies have. And this is so critically important for when it comes to valuing a company. So what's Tesla's valuation actually? Well, generally, people expect that Tesla will grow at about 50% per year. That is, their earnings per share will grow at 50%. So if their PE ratio is 50, it actually means you're just paying $1 per percent growth, right? That's actually not that bad. The ratio is 1, not bad. But when people see this, they get very confused by this 50 number and they say, oh, but Kevin, Tesla is overvalued because the S&P 500 is only selling for a multiple of 18 times. Sure, Maybe they're selling for a multiple of 18 times, but the average earnings of the S&P 500 are expected to only grow 4 to 5%. Even at 5%, you're paying a PEG ratio of somewhere around 3.6 for the S&P 500. It's because some companies are expecting to have negative earnings next year, right? So you're actually paying a much richer valuation for the S&P 500 than you are for Tesla. But people don't care about that. They just want to look at that number and say, well, 18 is smaller than 50, so it must be a better deal. It's stupid. But not only is it stupid, it's really important to make conservative estimates when you're doing fundamental analysis. And so what I'd like to do is I like to assume that Tesla is going to grow earnings at about 35% per year once we get to 2025. And you need to have continued hope that that growth rate is going to continue to stay at 35%. Right now it's between 45 and 50%. So I'm obviously building in some kind of slowdown because once, the law of large numbers, once you start producing millions of vehicles, it's harder to grow and grow and grow by 50% all the time. Well, if you're selling for 30, or if you're growing at 35% and you have a PEG ratio of 1.5, you'd have a future PE ratio of about 52.5. Really reasonable PEG ratio of 1.5, growth at 35%. And so when we look at my chart over here, and we look at the future valuation of Tesla and we use 50, well, of course, this company should be selling for nearly $600 per share in the future. What's remarkable about that is right now it's selling for about $150 per share. That represents about a 57% stock price growth year over year over year until we get to 2025. It's a really, really good rate of return if that can be realized. In my opinion, the only way this sort of longer term analysis doesn't get realized is if you end up having growth falter at Tesla. And this is why in my last video I was a little bit concerned because I said, look, we need more gigafactory announcements. In fact, I said in March of this year, Tesla should copy and paste their Giga Berlin and their Giga Texas model as soon as possible. Once, of course, it's feasible to do so. But once you ramp up Austin and Berlin and you've got that project figured out, you want to copy and paste those models to keep the growth going. And guess what Tesla is potentially about to announce within the next 1 to 2 weeks? A plant in Mexico, in northeastern Mexico. The next gigafactory could be announced. And what's interesting is it might actually only be about 6 to 7 hours away from Tesla Giga, or the Tesla Giga Texas, Austin. Now, what's really cool about that, in my opinion, is as soon as you cross the border, your average hourly wage plummets. And this is not to say that you want to take advantage of people who are working for less. It's that these areas don't have a lot of companies that drive up the competition for labor to help get people to a level where they can earn more money. Tesla coming in here demanding more labor increases the demand for labor in Texas, and you can see the average hourly earnings in Texas actually go up. If you Google the average hourly earnings for a person in Mexico, and you consider the fact that minimum wage in California is like 15.5. You consider that Texas, it's probably $9 or something. Texas minimum wage, let's see here. It's $7.25. Okay, either way, in America, you're looking at $7 to $15, right? Mexico, manufacturing industry, sitting around $3.50. That's crazy. So you actually have substantially cheaper labor in Mexico, which is wonderful for Tesla because you're lowering the cost of manufacturing vehicles a lot. I mean, think about it. If you're paying $15.50 for a worker in California, and you could be paying $3.50 for a worker in Mexico, you're paying 4.4 times as much for a human being in California, or twice as much for a human in Texas. Now, the good news for workers in Texas, because I never want anybody to think, oh my gosh, that's like slave labor or taking advantage of people. Well, first of all, the cost of living is lower in Mexico. But second of all, if Tesla goes to Mexico, they'll actually, again, create more demand for labor, and you could see that $3.50 go up to $4. So they're actually benefiting the area. Globalization is great because globalization leads to disinflation globally, but it actually raises the standard of living globally. So globalization is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And the fact that we have trade agreements with Mexico and Canada enables us potentially to take advantage of that $7,500 EV tax credit for vehicles assembled or manufactured in Mexico or in Canada or in the United States, which is really, really good because now Tesla could basically manufacture vehicles for a lower cost while still earning that tax credit. That's absolutely huge. Now, we're expecting this specific city to be we're expecting land for Tesla has already been purchased around Santa Catarina, We expect this to be in a corridor of other vehicle manufacturers, including GM, Kia, and Hyundai. They're already there. And Elon Musk has a goal of producing 20 million vehicles per year, or about 20% of global output by 2030. But we're never going to get there if we stop at 4.2 million vehicles because we haven't manufactured new gigafactories. So this is actually the perfect thing for Tesla to be doing. There's a rumor also that that we might see Tesla manufacture or announce cargo vans in this area, because in Mexico, a lot of vehicles are cargo vans that are manufactured. Now, cargo vans are really fascinating because maybe you build a factory in Mexico that doesn't have a battery line, and you manufacture the batteries at Austin, and you just ship the batteries over. It's not too far, it's 7 hours away. And then you build maybe cargo vans, and you announce a completely new vertical for Tesla. See, one of the big problems well, let me explain this. There are two types of cargo vans. So there's a cargo van that is sort of like your contractor's vehicle, right? Germany uses these types of vehicles, and Europe uses these types of vehicles substantially more than pickup trucks, because unfortunately the weather in Europe is a lot more wet, and so they like having enclosed vehicles. Now, you can have a pickup truck with sort of a bed lid, but you will see as many cargo trucks in Europe as you see pickup trucks in America. Everybody has cargo trucks, and they're pretty neat because you could have shelves in the back. I used to own a cargo truck for my construction company. I love cargo trucks. And in my opinion, they're actually not that expensive to manufacture because you don't have as many bells and whistles. You're just kind of a shell in the back. But not only can you have a cargo truck that potentially is a Tesla that can now compete with Mercedes, which if you think about it, or even Ford, like the Ford Transit, which if you think about it, they could probably compete substantially better than Mercedes because you have massive import costs and tariffs that actually make the Mercedes vans substantially more expensive here in America than they would be if they were just manufactured here in America and not by a German company. Now, I do believe that Germany manufactures a lot of their Sprinter vans in either Georgia. I think they send them over manufactured and they assemble them in Georgia, and some of it in Mexico. They do that to try to lower those impacts of the tariffs, but we don't have free trade agreements with Germany. So if Tesla can do this, now you've got a real competitor to the Ford Transit, and you're kind of squeezing Mercedes out of the way. Remember, if you've ever been to Europe, you might look around and go, why is every taxi and cop car a Mercedes or a Beamer? That's like insanely expensive. No, it's actually not. It's not that expensive because they're importing within Europe and they don't actually have all the crazy taxes. Now, the second type of vehicle that you could do with a cargo configuration is you throw benches in the back. This is your no-frills passenger van. And then, of course, you could have various different sizes, like this is the Mercedes Metris on the right. It's a little smaller. But passenger vehicles are something where, in my opinion, Tesla has really failed right now. See, I have a Tesla Model X, and I have the 7-seat configuration because I thought, well, I would like to have 7 seats. So that way, if I go with 2 children, my in-laws, and myself and my wife, that's 6, and then maybe we have one more person, like a nanny, we're full. The problem is, I can't actually use the vehicle with the configuration I just described because when you put up the 2 seats in the back of the Model X, you have no trunk space anymore. You're down to like a foot. You can't even put a 6-pack of beer. Okay, maybe you could put a 6-pack of beer, but you can't put a cooler of beer back there. You'd have to have that on somebody's lap. Not that that is exactly what's happened to me before, but it's frustrating. So I ask Lauren, I go, hey, you should get a Model X. She's like, no, I want a mommy van. And she has a mommy van. She's got a Toyota Sienna. And the reason for it totally makes sense. When we put 7 people in the car, we could still put all of our luggage in the back and go to the airport. Can't do that with any Tesla. However, if Tesla came out with a passenger van and assembled these in Mexico, boom, completely new vertical, would be a brilliant move for Tesla. And in my opinion, I'd be buying one instantly, probably even before the Cybertruck. Don't get me wrong, Cybertruck is dope. I really want the Cybertruck, but in terms of like the functionality that I need, especially if we're more children in the future, we need a cargo van, like a passenger van, right? Anyway, I want you to know a little bit more background. So NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was created in 1994, was actually replaced by now the USMCA, which is the US, Mexico, Canada Agreement, which is basically an upgrade. It's like more transparency, more like fixes loopholes, increases IP protections. But under the USMCA, Mexico just had a dispute resolution victory between the two countries, where Mexico wanted to be able to round up that if they produce 75% of a vehicle in Mexico, that it would actually be rounded up to 100% regional content for when they ship it to the United States, and that's important for other metrics that they try to hit. Mexico and Canada would benefit from that, but so would a company like Tesla if Tesla has a manufacturing plant in Mexico. Well, Mexico won that dispute resolution panel, and so now Mexico and Canada can actually round up that if a vehicle is produced with 75% parts, it can be deemed 100% regionally and free trade produced. This is a huge game changer. And Mexico is already the 6th largest manufacturer of heavy-duty vehicles for the cargo world, and they're the largest tractor exporter in the world. So if we go Tesla cargo vehicle, Mexico could be the perfect spot for that. But of course, they could also have another assembly line for, let's say, a 3 or a Y, or even the Cybertruck, because labor is less expensive. So either way you slice it, whether you're going to make cargo vans at Tesla Mexico, or you're going to just make more of the same vehicles, the idea that Tesla is producing or going to create a new gigafactory is exactly what we need to keep the growth story going for Tesla, to keep the valuation up for Tesla. At some point in the future price to earnings ratio for Tesla will rotate down. This is the law of large numbers, and sometimes people call it the S curve. The S curve, very, very simple. When you first start building, you produce very, very little vehicles, right? You start building, you produce little vehicles, then you ramp exponentially, and then it slows down. Think of this like a growth rate. Maybe over here, you're growing at 50%, 50%, 50%. Over here, you're only growing at 30%, or maybe you're growing, honestly, it's probably more. You're maybe growing at 200%, but your actual output is super low, right? Well, at some point, that's probably a better way to look at it. At some point in the future, that growth is going to go to 10% or 5%. And this is where the multiple for Tesla will collapse. But if Tesla gets to 20 million vehicles before they get to this level, boy, oh boy, you could have a phenomenally higher stock price before you even start downgrading the future multiple. Especially if Tesla in 10 years actually starts a new S-curve called the Tesla robot, right? And then you're building an S-curve on top of an S-curve. So what we're seeing with this Gigafactory announcement for Mexico, in my opinion, absolutely brilliant. This is what Tesla needs to do. I've been talking about this all year long about copy and pasting more Gigafactories, and it's finally here. I'm very, very excited about that. We should get the official announcement within the next couple of weeks here. And yeah, keep in mind as well that Mexico employs about 1 million people in the automotive industry. They're our 3rd largest trade partner. They're the 6th largest passenger vehicle manufacturer in the world, producing 3.7 million passenger vehicles annually. They're the 5th largest producer of components, auto parts worldwide. Largest export market for U.S. auto parts. 4th largest exporter of heavy-duty vehicles. And this is great. Out of this production, 64% of their vehicles were SUVs, minivans, and pickups. The remaining 36% were heavy-duty vehicles. Established brands here are Stellantis, BMW, Audi, GM, Honda, Kia, Mazda, Nissan, Volkswagen, Toyota. I'm pretty sure Mercedes is somewhere over there as well, but I don't see that here on the trade agreement website. Anyway, this is very exciting. I think this is perfect. This is just what Tesla needs. And hey, you know what? You know how people say, be fearful when people are greedy and be greedy when people are fearful? Everybody's fearful right now. So what are you?